Welcome everyone to Strait Science. Strait Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus in Nome, as well as University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. Both Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. And tonight I'm very excited because, well, we're going to talk about ice seals. So I'm happy as a clam when we do that. But we've got some really interesting information. A lot of times people during Strait Science have asked on walrus surveys, polar bear survey ones, how do you account for the animals swimming when you're photographing from a plane and you can't see them below the water? So we're going to get at that. And we have a bevy of really very good marine mammal biologists. We're going to hear from Michael Cameron first off. He is the leader of the NOAA Polar Ecosystems Program, which is the official research arm of the federal government for ice seals. And we will then hear from Josh London, and followed by Jessie Lindsay, who's going to bring it all home. And they're both going to talk about the individual species of seals and those results. So I'm really excited to hear about those. Save your questions to the end. And if I didn't say it, both Josh and Jessie are research biologists with the NOAA Polar Ecosystems Program. On top of it, all these nice people are coming to us from Seattle. So they're already starting at, it's 7:30 for them. So we really appreciate that time difference and your dedication after a long day to make time for the Bering Strait region. We really do appreciate that. With that, I will hand it off to Michael Cameron to start us off. Thank you so much. I want to hear about ice seal haul-out behavior. Take it away.
Well, thanks very much, Gay. This is a wonderful series. I'm always excited to come and be able to present our research. And I'm really excited about the research we're going to be presenting. Well, I'm not going to be presenting today, that Josh and Jessie will be presenting today. I wanted to just take a few minutes at the very beginning to introduce myself, the program, what we do, and why the research that Josh and Jessie are going to present is so important. So if you can move to the next slide. So again, my name is Michael Cameron. I'm the leader of the Polar Ecosystems Program. As Gay mentioned, we're the research part of NOAA Fisheries. We're the ones that collect the data and do the science that then informs the Alaska Regional Office, who's responsible for management decisions and things like that. I have decades of research studying seals in polar regions, and decades also working with co-management groups, primarily Alaska Native groups. I was born in Portland, Oregon. In the photo there, you can see a picture of my wife, Colleen, my son. That slide says he's 14, he's 15, and my daughter, Kate. She's 12. As I mentioned, I've had a lot of connection with the Alaska Native community, and my son was given the Inupiaq name Onaway by John Goodwin of Kotzebue, and my daughter was given the Inupiaq name Selekkutuk by Billy Adams, also in Uktiavik. So I feel very honored to be able to have those connections and be able to share them directly with my family. Next slide. So the AFSCs, that's the Alaska Fisheries Science Center. That's the sort of laboratory where all science, federal science in Alaska happens for NOAA fisheries. In our group, the Polar Ecosystems Program, our group monitors and studies seals in Alaska. We do that primarily through a combination of aerial surveys, where we'll use those to estimate abundance and distribution. We'll be talking a little bit about that. And we also use a number of research projects based out of vessels, like the Oscar Dyson. I've spoken about those in previous presentations, and also community-based projects. Those last two are often opportunities for us to actually go out and capture animals, instrument them with satellite tags, and then release them, and then have the information relayed back to us by satellite. The great part about the talk tonight is that we're actually going to be touching on all aspects of our work, both aerial surveys and the tagging work. We also have a very strong department that works on developing new methods, statistical methods for analysis and also for surveying, and those also will be featuring prominent today. Next slide. So as Gay mentioned, we'll be giving presentations on ice-associated seals. Just a quick refresher. There are 5 what are called fosid seals, or otherwise known as true seals in Alaska. There's the harbor seal, which we also study in the Polar Ecosystems Program, and then 4 different species of ice seals, or ice-associated seals. There's the spotted, ribbon, bearded, and the ring seals. All of these are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the ringed seal and the bearded seal, you can hit the forward, are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So why are we conducting this research? Well, we have indications that seals are responding to the obvious changes that are happening in the Bering Sea, not just the Bering Sea, but throughout Alaska. There's a lot of things that we do to study and monitor that can only be measured at the springtime. And we recognize that this field work often coincides with the same time when local coastal residents hunt marine mammals for subsistence purposes. We believe, and we've shown, that we can do all of this field work without impacting the hunting success of our Alaska Native colleagues and friends. And so together we're able to help protect these species. NOAA also has a mandate under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the ESA to manage and conserve these species. And part of the MMPA, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, establishes ways for us to have direct relationships with indigenous peoples and tribal nations. These relationships actually involve co-management of these important resources. Next slide. Excuse me. So the co-management agreement that the NOAA has that's related to ice seals is with the Alaska Native Ice Seal Committee. In Alaska, there are 5 regions that form a regional consortium around Alaska. In these are the 5 regions for which Alaska Natives take ice-associated seals. Excuse me. In addition to the ice seal co-management group, there's also an ice seal committee working group. This includes other partners, including the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, other educational groups like the University of Alaska and North Slope Borough, and other institutions. Together, every year, the Ice Seal Committee and the Ice Seal Working Group come together to develop an Alaska Ice Seal research plan. This research plan then describes all of the different research that has been conducted in Alaska on ice-associated seals since the development of the Ice Seal Committee, all of the work that's currently happening on ice-associated seals, and also a long list of other projects that we think would be useful to conduct on ice-associated seals. This research plan is updated annually. The reason I'm bringing it up is just as a way to say that all of the research that we do and our partners do are described and fully discussed at these Ice Seal Committee meetings. Next slide. So one of the biggest projects that we've discussed and recently completed was an aerial survey of all of the ice-covered waters of Alaska in the United States territory, including areas in the Bering Sea, the Chukchi Sea, and the Beaufort Sea. You can see in the map there those colored lines. They indicate all the different flight tracks that our aircraft has taken. This aerial survey that occurred last spring from April to June of 25 was the largest single survey that we've ever conducted of Alaska waters. It's the only the second time that we've been able to survey the entire area within Alaska for these ice-associated seal species. So together with previous research and this research, for the first time, we'll be able to identify trends in their population, whether populations are increasing, decreasing, or remaining stable. The aerial surveys were conducted with two different aircraft, both of them NOAA aircraft. Mounted under the bellies of those aircraft was a sensor package that included both thermal imagery to help detect seals on the ice, as well as visual sensors that help us to identify the seal to species. We worked out of Nome, Bethel, Kotzebue, Barrow, and Deadhorse, and overall we had 58 survey flights totaling almost 25,000 miles of effort. That means 25,000 miles of lines that we surveyed. Collecting the data is one thing. Analyzing the data is quite another thing. It's a huge effort, just as you can imagine, to collect this much data. With this much data requires a lot of work and thought put into how we're going to analyze it. As Gay mentioned at the very beginning of the talk, a big part of the work that we do is making sure that we appropriately estimate the numbers of seals that we can't see from the aircraft when we're flying. Seals can be hidden from us from a variety of ways, either being in the water or under snow layers. And that's why Josh and Jessie here are here to explain to you some of the details about how we figure that out. So without further ado, I introduce you to Josh London, who will be giving the first part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let's see. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Josh London, as Mike said, and I'm a wildlife biologist here at the Polar Ecosystems Program. And I'm going to take a moment here really quickly just to switch my screen sharing so you can see my slides instead of Mike's. So if you give me one moment.
Perfect. Looks perfect.
All right. Okay, so it looks like I navigated the hardest thing of this evening, and that is switching from Mike's slides to my slides. So again, thank you everybody for making the time to join us tonight. And I was really excited when Gay invited us to spend some time with you all this evening, because this is a paper that I worked on for several years, something that we've been thinking about for more than 10 years. And it had actually been a couple of years since the paper was published, so it was nice to revisit it and think about it in this context, and then to pair up with Jessie, who's got a paper who just came out last week. So you're getting some real hot off the press science tonight. So what I want to do tonight is talk to you specifically about kind of the haul-out behavior of seals in the Bering and Chukchi Seas. And we'll talk a little bit about their behavior, but we'll also, as Mike mentioned, connect that behavior and what we learned from the biologger deployments and our models to help us then improve our population estimates from the aerial surveys that Mike just described. So some of this is kind of repeating what Mike just relayed, but ice-associated seals, as you all know, rely heavily on sea ice for these critical life stages. So you've got pupping happens on the ice, nursing happens on the ice, breeding happens around the ice, and then they're molting when they shed their hair and grow a new coat every year. They need to haul out and rest on the ice during that time period. So in that springtime period, sea ice is really important. And we know there are climate-related changes in the sea ice extent, the quality of ice in the Bering and the Chukchi, and the communities are seeing it. We're seeing it in the satellite record, and we're seeing it in the scientific data that we collect. And from our perspective, these changes, it's really important for us to understand how are these seals that we work on, seals that you all know and love, seals that you rely on for food security. How are those populations changing amongst all these different environmental shifts? What's happening right now, and how might future potential shifts impact these seals? For my portion of the presentation tonight, I'm going to focus on bearded seals, ribbon seals, and spotted seals, and then Jessie will talk about ring seals. And just to give a bit of an overview, bearded seals, they use sea ice primarily for resting and pupping in the early spring and throughout the summer when there's sea ice around. Very important animals in the Arctic ecosystem. Spend a lot of time diving to the bottom, feeding on various benthic prey. Ribbon seals are less known in Alaska because they spend most of their time pelagic out to sea. They depend heavily on ice for their molting, but also for pupping and breeding, as we mentioned, and spend a lot of their time on ice in the southern Bering Sea at the ice edge towards the Russian border and over into Russia, so aren't necessarily seen as commonly in nearshore Alaska waters. And then you got spotted seals. Spotted seals are the kind of ice seal version of a harbor seal. Again, like ribbon seals, haul out on the ice in the spring. But spotted seals do use coastal land when the ice retreats. So you'll often see spotted seals in the Bristol Bay area and up along the Alaska coast or on the Russian coastline, hauling out on shore in time periods when there's no ice around. As Mike mentioned, we rely heavily on aerial surveys to count seals, and many of you might recognize the planes from last April that were spent quite a bit of time at Bering Air there in Nome. We spent time in the Nome community as we conducted the surveys, and it really was a privilege to spend time in the communities and to really understand the connection between the communities and the sea ice and the seals that we study. It was great also just to have the support of the communities as we for some of us, it was our first time kind of spending time in Nome or Bethel or even Utqiagvik. It had been a while since I had been there. So it was really nice to spend time there and to really get an opportunity to talk with some of you as we were conducting the surveys. But, and here, the map that Mike showed again, covering all this sea ice throughout the Bering Sea, the Chukchi, and the Beaufort. And during these surveys, we're taking photos of seals. And these photos are then used to count how many seals do we see. And so you can see on the left side of this image, you've got a thermal image from the camera. The bright white spot tells us that there's a seal there, but we don't know. Is that a bearded seal? Is it a ribbon seal? Maybe it's a spotted seal. And so we have color cameras that are also collecting imagery. And then we can zoom in on that color imagery to the same place where the thermal hotspot is and get a close-up view of the seal to identify the species. But there's one thing that our cameras don't capture, and that are seals in the water. So our aerial surveys are this really efficient method for counting seals. As you can see, we can cover huge areas, and we can do that quite efficiently. But the surveys only capture seals that are available on the ice. And you'll hear me sometimes use that phrase, availability. It's basically, is the seal out of the water available for our cameras to capture? And so only seals resting on the ice when the aircraft passes over are visible. So we have to consider that there are some seals that are swimming in the water at the time that our plane flies over. And so one big challenge for us is to understand behavior of seals so that we know given some conditions, given the time of day, given the day of year, given the species, what portion of the seals might be in the water versus the portion that's out of the water. And this is how we can estimate total abundance. Instead of just saying the total number of seals in the Bering Sea is the total number that we count on the ice, we then adjust that estimate to account for the seals in the water. So if, let's say, we go through and we count 50 seals, but we know that 50% of the seals are in the water, then that means there's actually 100 seals in the area. So what we're trying to do is to use biologgers that we attach to the seals and other statistical methods to estimate that proportion so we can correct our surveys and get something that's a better estimate of total abundance. So I mentioned biologgers. These are, sometimes also referred to as tags or satellite tags. Many of you might have seen depictions, and I think we had a few on that previous slide when I showed the spotted seal. It had a tag or a biologger glued to its back. Jessie has some photos as well, a biologger glued to the back. But we also attach biologgers to their flippers. And the important reason to attach biologgers to the flippers is because those devices stay in the water unless the seal hauls out. So those tags give us a really good indication of whether or not the seal's in the water or out of the water. It's got a little saltwater switch on it that measures conductivity. And the other nice thing is that those tags stay on the flipper throughout the molt. So we talked earlier about how molting is a really important behavior that seals participate in the springtime, in the late springtime. And one of the problems for our studies is that when the seal molts, they lose their hair, and the tag that we've glued, the biologger that we've glued to their hair falls off. And so then we stop getting data from the seal. But by having the biologgers attached to the flipper, we get a continuous data stream throughout the time period that we're interested in. And we get a much better picture of their behavior, of how much time they're spending out of the water versus in the water. And I should also mention that all of these biologgers, whether on the back or on the flipper, transmit all of their data back to us through the satellite. For this kind of purpose tonight, and then what we're talking about, one of the sensors I mentioned is this wet-dry sensor. So it's a conductivity sensor, two little pieces of metal. And when it's in salt water, it conducts. And so we know that it has a signal on the tag that tells it that the animal's in the water. When it's out of the water, there's no conductivity, and so we know it's out of the water. And the tag keeps track of these things and then summarizes it and sends it back to us through the satellite. And what it sends back is basically the percent of each hour of each day that the seal was wet or dry. And that's the basis for a lot of the modeling that we do. And also just, for while these tags sometimes last a couple of years, for this, we're focusing specifically on the March to July period because that aligns with this, more intensive haul-out period, and it also aligns with the time of year when we would do our surveys. Just to give you an extent, so we've been doing some amount of biologger deployments since 2005. And all the way through 2021, and even some more recent data that was done a couple of years ago that's not shown here. And this just gives you an idea of where these deployments have happened. So Mike talked about the work that we've done with coastal communities and also collaborations with ADF&G, North Slope Borough to get deployments out on bearded seals there in the coastal areas. The ribbon seal deployments are part of cruises on big ships that we've done. And those are much further out in the Bering Sea, past St. Matthew towards the kind of the Russian border. Mike was involved in some very early studies where we put tags out on ribbon seals in Russia. And then we have spotted seals, which have had deployments both in the coastal areas, but also in the central Bering Sea and up on the Bering Sea shelf. And then just to kind of connect again, our deployments and the data that we get to the aerial surveys The outlined area on these maps shows the extent of our aerial surveys, either by us or also in previous years in partnership with Russian colleagues. Just wanted to take a moment and give you a one kind of snapshot example of what the biologger data looks like. So if you think about this as kind of like a calendar depiction, so on the left side, you've got, so we have 2016 and 2017 for one ribbon seal. On the left side, you can see we've got the hour of the day, so that's in UTC. And then so each square represents an hour of every day in that month. So this record started at the 1st of April. And so all the blue squares are hours of the day when the seal was mostly in the water. And then as you start to see yellow squares, those squares show hours of the day when the seal was mostly hauled out on ice. And so you see this pattern of, as you get into May, the seals are spending a lot more time hauled out. You can see this tag. So we put the tag out in late March. So we got data in 2016 through April and May. And then we also have the next year in 2017, that tag was still transmitting. The biologger was still transmitting. So we had the seal was in the water quite a bit in March, with just one or 2 days where it hauled out, and then back in the water. And then later on in the spring, you can see April and May, it's spending a lot more time hauled out. So we have several hundred of records from seals with this type of data. And this is what we use to try to build our statistical models and to give us insight into, why are seals potentially hauling out on some days, but not other days in the springtime. Is it weather? Is it their time of day? Is it sea ice conditions? Things like that. So when we put all that together and we do our statistical model, we kind of have these general themes. And so before I go in and show you the actual output and the graphics from our model and our predictions in a bit more detail, I wanted to provide a couple of just general overviews of the general patterns that we see. And the first thing is that the peak haul out time, like if you wanted to go out on the ice and find what time of day you're most likely to see more seals hauled out on ice, it's going to be relative to solar noon. So when that sun is at the highest kind of apex in the day. And so there's a strong pattern for that. We see seals really like to be hauled out on the ice in the middle of the day. And that's because, they want to rest and they want to kind of pull in that warmth from the sun. As they move into molting, that warmth that they absorb helps them energetically shed their hair and grow that new coat. So the first thing to think about and to know is that seals like to haul out around solar noon in the middle of the day. The other thing is to think, so we just talked about like on a daily basis, but then if you think about, well, what's the seasonal pattern? And we have this general pattern where you've got seals in March that are, and even a little bit before then in parts of February, probably where seals are in the water foraging, gaining mass as they're getting ready to have their pups. But they're also spending a little bit of time on the ice. They're kind of understanding where the sea ice edge is, finding it, because, it's just kind of come down from the north. And then as we get into March, they start hauling out more and more on the sea ice. We see this increased activity, and moms with pups haul out to have their pups to nurse. And then you start moving into this molting period, this period where in May and into June, where seals are shedding their hair, their old coat, and then growing an entire new coat of hair. And this is where we start to see that strong kind of link to the warmth from the sun. And then as we move into June and July, we see seals spending less time on the ice. That's partly because their molt is finished, but it's also because there's less ice, and so they're now getting back in the water. Moms or adults who have exerted a lot of energy nursing a pup or molting, they're spending all this time out on the ice and not able to forage. They need to make up for those lost calories. So we start to see them getting back into foraging behavior and spending more time in the water as we move into June and July. So I mentioned a little bit about winter. Sorry, about weather. Like all of us, temperature, wind speed, and precipitation. If we're inside our house and we look outside of the weather forecast says it's going to be especially cold or especially windy, or maybe it's going to be raining or snowing, we may not want to go outside. And seals are the same way. They're impervious to a lot, but they still have their preferences. And so we also wanted to make sure that as we're building our statistical model and trying to better understand haul-out behavior, we wanted to make sure we're incorporating some of this weather. And so we brought into our model things, temperature, wind speed, and precipitation, so we can see how that might impact the behavior of seals. So now I'm going to take a moment and walk through some of these model outputs. And, I'll admit, so these figures were created for a scientific paper, and I unfortunately didn't have time to kind of redo them for a different audience, but I'm going to take some time just to walk you through what we're seeing and hopefully give you some insight into what our models provided. So all of them are generally going to, these kind of green, blue, and yellow figures are going to show the same thing, and that is on the bottom, you've got the day of the month kind of moving from left to right. And on the top, you can see March, April, May, June. And then you've got hour of day on the left. Now, for bearded seals, we only had a small number of individuals in our study. So we just lumped all the ages together. But for the other ones, you'll see we actually break it down into different age classes. And so what this is showing is that you can see we've got local solar hours, so noon. So that's right around the maximum point where the sun is in the sky. You can see that in May, there's a really bright area, and that corresponds with bearded seals wanting to be hauled out in the middle of the day. But you can also look seasonally and say that in March, there's not a lot of haul out behavior. And then as you move into April and May, it really picks up. And then June, you can see more blue as the seals are spending more time in the water. The other interesting thing with bearded seals is that we have this kind of a tendency to haul out around noon, but also around midnight. And we're not really sure what that means, but it could be the fact that bearded seals are a little bit further north. And when you're in May, there's a lot of daylight around. So they're spending, maybe there's 2 periods when they haul out for a bit, and then they go in the water to forage and then haul out some more, or spreading their haul out behavior a bit more. But we're not exactly sure why we see this kind of central around both noon and midnight, but it is a unique aspect of bearded seals. The other thing I'll point out when it comes to bearded seals is it's not going to be so obvious, but that you can see up at the very top, I have a haul out probability, and you can see the maximum number there is 0.3, or that's 30%. So spending 30% of their time hauled out. Bearded seals, that's a lower value than you're going to see for ribbon and spotted seals. So in general, bearded seals tend to spread their haul out behavior across the season and aren't as concentrated. So now we get into something a little bit more complicated, but hopefully what I walked you through with bearded seals helps you kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. So on the right side, we'll start and look at ribbon seal haul out probability. And you can see we have different panels. So we have adult females, adult males, subadult, and young of the year, or the pups that were born that year. And then we have the same organization. So you have March, April, May, and June going from left to right. And then you have the different local solar hours. So 12 or noon is the period when the time of day when the sun is at its highest point. And for ribbon seals, we can see a couple of things. One is you see, if we start at the bottom and work our way up, you can see young a year. So these are pups that have just weaned. So those pups don't know what's going on at all. Mom has just kind of left them, and they are on their own, and they're just spending time. They're these big blubber balls. They've got all this excess fat that mom's left them, and they're spending time just laying there all day. And then slowly they start to get more interested in pursuing and going out in the water as the ice retreats, and then they become slowly a little bit more like a normal seal, where they're spending time in the water, but still, they're young animals. They're still trying to learn their way. So they're hauling out in the middle of the day and feeding the rest of the time. And then if you move up to subadults, so these are animals that probably aren't breeding. They probably are still kind of learning their way, these 2 or 3 year olds. And they've got this longer period of time. They're one of the first ones that show up in early April and start spending some time hauled out. And then they are a lot more protracted. So they don't have to worry about, giving birth and nursing. They're maybe not so worried about breeding. So they have a little bit of this longer period. They show up early. They spend time at the ice. They probably complete their molt before the other age classes. And then if you go up next, you've got the adult males. So adult males, they don't need to show up early because they don't have, they're not giving birth. They're not nursing. So they're skewed farther to the right and concentrated in late May and June, when they're interested in breeding early in May, and then when they move into their molt in June. And then May, you can see that's where on the left side, you've got adult females that might have been pregnant, giving birth and nursing as they're hauling out in the middle of the day and spending more and more time into May. But we do have indications that ribbon seals will leave their pups on the ice and go forage. They're not just there all the time with their pups. And then adult females tend to have the kind of extend their molt into June the farthest. So they've had an adult female has had a lot of energy that it's expended in nursing and then molting, and so they take a little bit longer and go into June. And then on the left side, just quickly kind of summarize these model outputs for temperature, wind, and precipitation. So essentially, as temperature increases, you can see those lines move up from left to right in the upper left corner. The haul out probability increases. So warmer temperatures, ribbon seals are more likely to be hauled out. As the wind increases, the lines move down from left to right, and so the haul out probably just decreases. So as the wind picks up, ribbon seals are less likely to be hauled out. You can see for both pressure, so like storms and things like that don't seem to have much of an impact. Those lines are fairly straight, and they're especially straight when you look at precipitation. Not much of a care. It's probably snow or things that seals can deal with just fine. So precipitation doesn't seem to have too much of an impact. Now we're switching to spotted seals. It's a very similar pattern to ribbon seals. The one thing that I'll point out when it comes to behavior is that we see adult males starting to haul out earlier, kind of in line with females, and we think that's associated with the fact that spotted seals form these triads. So as a female is nursing her pup, a suitor male will show up and spend time on the ice with the female, waiting for her to wean the pup so that they can breed. So this is an indication where our models are giving us some insight that matches the biology that we understand, where males show up and spend time hauled out with the females and form these triads, which is something we didn't see in ribbon seals. And as far as kind of our understanding, ribbon seals don't tend to form the triads like spotted seals do. You can also see that the lines when it comes to weather on the left are a little bit more flat. Yeah, there's a little bit of an increase in haul out probability as the temperature increases. And yeah, there's a little bit of a decrease as the wind picks up, but it's not as steep as it was for ribbon seals. This just shows that spotted seals are pretty tough. And I can speak from my own personal experience being around them when we're catching them. They're pretty tough individuals, and I think they can take most of the weather that the Bering Sea can throw at them. So they're not as impacted by weather as ribbon seals are. So let's think about some big picture ideas. What are our observations? So, well, our observations kind of indicated in our model.
Josh, sorry, before you get going on this, I just want to say one of our audience members is having trouble seeing the slides, and I'm seeing you. You look perfect. Is anyone else? Because I just want to know if this is an isolated problem. They're trying to follow along. Anyone else? Everybody can follow along. Put something in the chat.
I think everything is good on my end over here. I agree.
Okay.
Awesome. Hopefully the YouTube recording works out fine. So if there was anything missed, you can watch it back and
right. Well, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. Just didn't.
No worries. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Carry on.
Our models are indicating that there is this variation in behavior in different years from ribbon and spotted seals. You know, I provided this kind of nice, smooth picture, but the reality is that year to year there are differences. We all know that every year is different in the Bering. The Chukchi and the Beaufort, they have different, and we're seeing more and more differences between years. And so there is differences, but we're trying to kind of create a general pattern so we can use that general pattern to help us improve our estimates for abundance. We unfortunately don't have enough data and enough biologgers out every year to really understand a lot of those differences that might be happening on a year-to-year basis. So we're trying to create a general understanding and then use that general understanding to improve our estimates. They could always be improved with more data, but we don't have that. But we do want to acknowledge that there's these differences from year to year, and we see some hints of that, but I didn't talk about it too much tonight. And the other thing we did try to look at is kind of, well, maybe there might be some sort of connection between how much ice is there, the ice extent, and the timing of haul-out peaks. And at least with the data we have, we didn't see any strong signal for that. And the interpretation is that seals are really kind of have a lot of these internal biological drivers, you know, hormonal triggers for breeding, for molting, and to have their pups. And those are very influential. And so when those hormonal triggers kick in, when those physiological things kick in, seals are going to seek out ice. And that happens on a fairly predictable time every year. So that's what's driving their haul out behavior. And they really are kind of prioritizing their physiological needs, even in years with less ice. As long as there's some ice available, seals tend to find it and try to take advantage of it to rest. But the less ice that's around for less time, then some of those physiological needs are going to be really stressed. So if there's not enough ice early in the season, then moms can't find ice to have the pups to nurse. So that stresses them out. In years where the ice goes away quickly, then seals are struggling to find places where they can haul out and conduct their molt. I mentioned that the individual kind of variability is a limitation in our data. We just don't have enough data to really look at that. We know it's an issue. We try to account for it, but we still, it's a limitation. I mentioned that bearded seals in particular, we didn't have enough data to kind of look at those differences between adult males and adult females, or subadults and young of the year. So we had to kind of lump them together as just a generic bearded seal. We're also, we're relying on these kind of remote sensed sea ice characteristics. We're relying on kind of large scale weather climate models. And that doesn't allow us to really look at fine scale ice characteristics or fine scale weather. Again, we're kind of look at these general characteristics of climate and of weather and how that might be impacting the general behavior of seals when it comes to hauling out. And then, on land or inland behavior, we know that bearded seals go up rivers. We know that spotted seals haul out on land. And that really wasn't a part of this study. Our aerial surveys don't cover those habitats. But it's not, it is something that we know exists, and it's worth further investigation later on. So again, this is all about improving our aerial surveys and helping us make sure that the estimates that we come up with and the estimates that we provide to the public are as accurate as possible. And kind of as I depicted here on the right side, there are always going to be seals hauled out, but then there are seals underwater that we're missing. And so we're just trying to bring as much information as we can to our population estimates to really make sure that they accurately account for time of day, the day of the year, the weather, and then we can get a better understanding of the population in any one year. And then, as Mike was talking about earlier, when we get multiple estimates of the populations over time, then we'll be able to detect some sort of population trend and let you know if we think the population is going up, if it's going down, or if it's staying pretty stable. And it really is, this idea that we can't just go out and do surveys, or we can't just go out and catch seals and put biologgers out. We have to take this kind of holistic approach where we are trying to do both of those things, and both of those things are important aspects of our estimates of abundance, monitoring trend, and then obviously kind of the management and conservation of Arctic seals, as we're all kind of in an area of really strong change in the environment. And the last thing I want to do is just take a moment to really recognize that this research relies heavily on the cooperation of regional partners. A lot of the data we presented was supported by the ICEAL committee, coordinated through the ICEAL committee so that Alaska Native members from communities could join us on some of these cruises. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game and North Slope Borough also work closely with communities to get biologgers out to collect information. And this kind of, not only is the partnership among the different agencies important, it's a partnership in collaboration with the communities. And that really is a vital role of local and traditional knowledge and understanding Arctic ecology. And I'm really proud that the data that went into the study really came from so many different sources, and so many people had their hands in the original data that was put out, the deployment of the tags or interpretation of the data. And it's been a real privilege. So that's the end of my presentation. I went a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I think hopefully I've covered some things that you find interesting. And now we're going to move on to Jessie.
All right. While Jessie's getting her slides loaded up, we'll just remember questions at the end. So make a note. I've got some and lined up. And whenever you're ready, Jessie, or if you have any, Zoom is, I know, not
our most familiar.
Not your most
tool.
familiar. And that's okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it. We're patient.
Let's see. Can you see a slide?
Perfectly. Yep. It's perfect.
Okay.
Presentation
I thought
mode.
I had this before where that I could also see you, and I can't, but that's fine.
All right.
I will see you after it's all done.
Carry on. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So you've already gotten a great introduction from Gay and then Mike and then Josh, but I am going to continue talking about haul-out behavior with another species of ice seal, ring seals, and their haul-out behavior and emergence timing in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Seas. So ring seals are unique from the other species that Josh was just talking about, in that not only do they use the sea ice, but they also use the snow that's on top of the sea ice. So after snow has accumulated in the winter, they'll excavate these snow-covered dens or lairs where they'll rest and give birth to their pups later on in the spring. And lairs protect pups from predation from polar bears, and when the pups are still really small, from birds and foxes. And they also provide important protection from hypothermia. These layers are really insulative, and when pups are first born, they don't have any blubber yet to keep them warm. They just have their white coat for that. And that white coat only works as an insulator when it's dry. So layers give pups a warm, dry place to haul out until they've grown some blubber and are ready to be exposed. That on the left is a museum exhibit there, and on the right, these are two photos of the same partially melted layer with the ceiling that has opened up. And up on the upper right here, that is a ring seal pup peeking its head out of that open ceiling. And then this here on the bottom is that same layer. Closer up, you can see how it's melted open, but inside there is a cavity where the ring seals can come up from under the ice up onto that sheltered area to rest. Now, later on in the spring, ring seals shift from predominantly hauling out inside of those snow layers to predominantly hauling out on the surface of the snow and sea ice. And they do this to bask and molt. When Josh already shared with you that molting is a really important time for seals. And when it's time for emergence, these seals can either actively tunnel their way out of layers, or the layers can just melt and collapse, or even if the layer is still intact, seals can just switch their behavior to hauling out elsewhere out in the open. And this transition from mostly using layers to being out in the open on the snow and sea ice we'll refer to as emergence. And this behavioral transition is important for ring seals ecologically, but it's also of practical importance for us when trying to make abundance estimates for population monitoring, because emergence majorly affects the number of ring seals that we can count in aerial surveys. So to give you a better idea of what I mean, here's an example image taken from an aerial survey. This is a top-down view of the ice. And for seals to be detected in an aerial survey like this one, not only do they have to be hauled out of the water, as you just heard in Josh's presentation, but they also have to be exposed on the surface of the ice and snow rather than hidden inside of a snow layer. So without knowing emergence timing, we don't know what fraction of the population is visible or how to convert from a count to an abundance estimate. And in this image here, there's only one seal visible. So from this image alone, you might think that there are very few ring seals in this area. Or is it just that there are seals here that are hidden under the snow? So looking at this same site, but about a week later, things look really different. Instead of just that one seal at its breathing hole, there are now 5 seal structures visible, all with multiple seals hauled out, including at that center circle from the right there, a mother and pup at a layer that has melted open. And so if you were going off of this image, you might make a pretty different conclusion about how many seals there are. So understanding the timing of emergence and when ring seals are emerging from those layers is really important for interpreting aerial survey counts and making those abundance estimates that we need to be able to track for any potential changes in population size. So hopefully having convinced you that emergence is important, for this study, we asked, when do ring seals emerge in the spring? And what environmental variables influence the timing of that transition? And do we expect that to be impacted by climate change? So as with Josh's study, I'm using Haulout data from ring seals using the same types of biologgers. And this biologging data set is from a set of previous projects that were conducted by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the North Slope Borough, as well as NOAA. And this spans a roughly 15-year period. Those biologgers were deployed from 2005 to 2020, but since some of them record for 2 years, we have data from 2005 to 2021. And for the purpose of looking at emergence, I'm zeroing in on the period of February to mid-June. And we have a total of 64 different ring seals in this data set, 48 adults and 16 subadults. And these same kind of biologgers, as Josh mentioned, can be mounted on a seal's back or on the flipper. And if you'll remember, these biologgers record location, and they have that wet-dry sensor that tells you the hourly percent time that the seal was hauled out. Unfortunately, what these seals don't have is a layer sensor that can directly tell us whether a seal that's hauled out of the water is hauled out inside of a snow layer or hauled out in the open. It's a little more complicated than that. But we can summarize that Haulout data into 2 daily metrics that can give us some indirect clues about emergence. And those 2 daily metrics are the amount of time that seals spend hauled out per day and the time of day at which those seals are hauling out. And these are useful because these both show some seasonal changes. So I'm going to show you some seasonal patterns averaged over all the seals in our data set. So over the course of our February to June study period, winter into spring, we see a major shift in the amount of time that seals spend hauled out of the water. So in February through early April, the seals are spending most of their time swimming, but then that really skyrockets later on into the spring. We also see a major shift in time of day that the seals are hauling out. So the dashed line here is solar noon when the sun is highest in the sky. But in that blue shaded zone of winter, the haul out timing appears pretty messy. So we have time of day on the y-axis here, and early on in the season, it's pretty variable. But generally when seals are hauling out, they're doing so at night, far away from that dashed noon line. And then later in the season, they shift their behavior to really strongly cluster their haul out around solar noon. And previous studies tell us that this switch from short, mostly nocturnal haul out to much longer midday haul out coincides with emergence. So maybe we can use these seasonal patterns to our advantage. So in the winter, as you saw in the last slide, we see that TEG generally sends us this signal of short haul out times and mostly hauling out at night. And we can think of this as a fingerprint or signature for a layer behavioral state. And later on in the spring, we start seeing daily haul out data that has this different pattern of longer haul out times, mostly around solar noon. And then that appears to be the fingerprint or signature of an emerged state. So we can build this behavioral decoding tool, essentially, which is a model that helps identify, given a seal's daily haul out record, is it more likely that that seal is in a layer state or an emerged state? And when does that specific seal switch from being in the layer state to the emerged state? But before we applied that decoding model to the whole data set, we first had to ask whether it was appropriate to group all the seals together or if there were important differences to consider. We found that age class makes a big difference. So on the left, you can see that the adults in darker blue show that strong seasonal increase in the amount of time that they're spending hauled out, whereas the subadults in that lighter blue, even though they are increasing the amount of time that they spend hauled out of the water, it's not as stark as it is for the adults. And we also see a difference in the seasonal patterns for time of day. So adults show that really crisp switch from mostly nocturnal haul out to hauling out around solar noon, but the subadults are a lot messier and don't show an obvious switch in that time of day that they're hauling out. So because these behaviors were so distinct, we decided to build separate decoders. And so for the rest of this talk, I will be focusing on the results for the adult model, and we'll be skipping over the results for the subadults today. We can look at the characterization of the haul out behavior from that best decoder model and see how it split up all of the observed haul out behavior into different patterns matching with the fingerprints of those layer and emerge states. So first, what we're starting off with is these gray bars and black curves showing the distribution of haul out behavior for all of the adult seals and the amount of time that they spent hauled out per day and the time of day at which they were hauled out over the entire study period. And then that distribution then gets split up into haul out that the model guessed belonged to the layer state here in blue. And we'll notice that in that blue layer state, they spend very little or even zero of their time hauled out on the water in that left plot. And they also prefer to haul out at night, So this is tracking with the seasonal patterns that we've already seen. And that average time of day for them during that layer period is around 11 p.m., so almost midnight. Then the model identified the emerged state here with these orange curves. So the behavior totally flips, and the seals kind of switch their schedule as well. So now they are spending longer hours on the ice and also shifting their schedule to peak at solar noon. And it's reassuring to see this come out from our behavioral decoding models because these patterns match up really well with some previous work by Kelly et al. That was done in the Beaufort Sea looking at ring seal haulout behavior before and after emergence, where they actually had on-the-ground observations to confirm when seals were in layers and when they had emerged. So that gives us some support that we really are identifying emergence with our model. So now that we have a model that can tell us when a seal has emerged, we can also ask bigger biological questions, like what environmental variables are linked to that behavioral switch. We tested several environmental variables, and for adults, we found that emergence probability increased with warmer daily air temperature and with longer days. So emergence probability was essentially 0 until temperatures reached freezing, which is shown with that dashed blue line. And then they really took off above freezing. Emergence probability also started increasing as days got longer, moving from 24-hour darkness to longer and longer days, with emergence probability really starting to go up above roughly 15 hours. And of course, warmer temperatures and longer days are closely linked in the Arctic as spring progresses, but our analysis showed that both of these variables were important. So in other words, a long day isn't enough if you have a long day that still happens to be really cold. So when both signals of warm temperature and long day length occur together, that's when emergence probability is highest. And there are a few reasons why changes in air temperature and day length could be important. So as both of these variables increase, those conditions make it more advantageous for seals to abandon their layers and haul out in the open on the surface of the snow and sea ice where they can soak up the warm sun to facilitate molting. And at the same time, warming temperatures can also cause their layers to melt and collapse, like that puff layer in the center, or even prior to layer collapse, melt can start to degrade the integrity of a layer in other ways, like drippy, slumping ceilings, like in that right image, so that the layers are no longer as good of a warm, dry place to haul out. And since we established that emergence is strongly linked with temperature, we would expect to see a clear geographic trend. Seals in the colder north should emerge later, and that is exactly what we find when we look at emergence dates, meaning the actual dates that our decoder model identified as the dates that each individual seal switched from using layers predominantly for hauling out to predominantly hauling out in the open. So first, looking at the big picture, all of the emergence dates for our adult seals, we have a median emergence date of May 12th, which lines up really nicely with when we've seen ring seal counts spike in aerial surveys in the past. And because our data set covers a broad geographic area and a 15-year time span, we could also dig deeper into those patterns. We didn't find a clear signal of changes over time in our data set, but we did find really strong spatial patterns. As you can see in this plot, the seals that were farther north emerged much later than seals that were farther south in the southern Bering Sea, with a difference of roughly 6 days later per degree of latitude. And this is really important information for planning aerial surveys because it tells us that areas farther north need to be flown over later to ensure that ring seals have actually emerged and are available to be counted, and not just spending all of their time in the water or inside their snow layers. So to wrap this all up, we found that emergence timing was strongly linked to environmental cues, specifically air temperature and day length. And because of this close relationship, it's possible that as spring temperatures rise above freezing earlier and earlier in the year, ring seal emergence timing could also shift earlier as well. We also have some indication that age class matters. We didn't really dig into subadults today, but we did see that the subadults in our data set showed much messier behavior than adults did without as clear of a seasonal change in their behavior. So it's possible that there could be hormonal differences or differences in the habitat that these seals are occupying. And those would be valuable to explore in the future. Thirdly, biologgers have been a valuable tool for scientists for many years, but this is the first time that we've used Haulout data from biologgers to try to decode those hidden behavioral states of when seals are using layers versus when they've emerged. So this is a new way of monitoring emergence timing and monitoring for potential shifts in emergence timing going forward. And finally, as Josh and I have both highlighted, we can't count the seals we can't see. So quantifying seal hollow behavior, and in the case of ring seals, emergence timing, is important for turning raw counts from aerial surveys into more accurate abundance estimates for those populations. I want to quickly thank the many co-authors, funding agencies, and especially the Alaska Native community members and field researchers who helped to deploy the biologgers for these projects over the years to generate this data set. And with that, I'll leave you with the information for our paper, which was just published in Ecology and Evolution, if you want to dig into the details. And yeah, thank you all for listening. And Josh and I would be happy to take any questions that you may have for either of our presentations.
All right. Well, thank you all three so much. That was a great presentation. And before we get to questions, the Strait Science audience, this is a good time to, because it's never easy to be a public speaker, especially when you're talking at what's soon to be pretty getting later and later in their evening. Throw some love in the chat box for Jessie, Josh, and Michael as they took the time out to give us the latest on ice seal haul-out behavior. I've got some questions, but we will throw it open to the audience. Now, see, people are getting very good at the graphics or the emojis. I don't know what you call those things, but it's very good. So thank you very much, all three of you, for giving us that presentation. We really appreciate it. Any questions to start off with? There was a question in the chat early on from Olivia Lee. This was for Josh's portion, and it said, was sea ice extent the only sea ice variable modeled on haul-out behavior? And the response was, yes, we were only able to look at the total sea ice extent and explore whether that was connected to a difference in the timing of peak haul-out. We have some other studies underway where we're looking at the impact of sea ice concentration, distance from ice edge, and other characteristics. So that's good. You've got some kudos in the chat from Edwin and from Trees and Dirt. Both of you, I'm glad to see you on, so that's really nice you're here. And any questions? So I guess I'll start off. And that is when you were giving your results to the Ice Seal Committee, because I know all of this is to get at when you're flying your planes and you're making your photographs, and then you count all those little seals up, whatever they are, ring seals, bearded. You want to make sure you're as accurate as possible and not doing too few or too, having some inaccuracy because of the seals are in the water. So I'm guessing you feel pretty good about that, right now, for your counts. So that's really good. My question is, would any of those biologger, those look like they're permanently affixed to the flipper, or do those come off?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I mentioned we have these two types of biologgers that we've typically used. One is the ones that are glued to the hair. So usually use either super glue or epoxy to glue them to the hair. And as you know, like when every year the seals will shed that hair and grow a whole new coat. So then the tag falls off.
Yeah.
But then we have the other ones that I showed and Jessie showed as well that are attached to the webbing on the rear flipper. And those have battery life of, we've had some tags last for up to 3 years and continue to provide some information on where the seals are and their haul out behavior. But they, they've got screws that hold them on, and though eventually those screws will probably come out and the tag will fall off, or the tag will migrate out with the skin. As it'll just naturally kind of migrate out through the web, fall off. But they're we know they can stay on for 3 or maybe up to 4 years, probably a little bit longer than that, but eventually they do come off.
So because Bering Strait region is one of the most proficient and expert in marine mammal harvest and comprehensive use of the marine ecosystem, if someone were to harvest or find dead on the beach a seal with one of those, is there any regulatory concern or any kind of personal concern if you turn that in or let someone know?
I know they would be really great. We have, the seals that we work on are in such remote locations that we don't really have much opportunity to ever get any of those tags back. We don't have much opportunity to learn about how do those tags, how long do they stay on, things like that. All of our biologgers have a small serial number on them and a contact phone number. So that would be one way to get in touch with us. The other thing I'll point out that I think is also important for hunters in the community to know, and those out and about, is that when we capture seals, we also put a numbered tag on the other rear flipper, and that is a smaller little plastic piece that has a number on it and also has our contact information on it. So it's another way in which you can get in touch with us and let us know that you've encountered a seal that we've captured.
What color is that tag? Sometimes they get kind of beat up.
Yeah, the colors change from year to year. We try to use different colors in different years. But yeah, we can, if you were fortunate enough to find one of those seals, then we would be able to share all kinds of information with you about the history of that seal.
So there's no regulatory, no problem if somebody harvests or finds and recovers one of those tags. That's kind of what I'm getting at, because you're in this area here has a good opportunity to maybe find one of these seals, either washed up or harvested. So there's no penalty.
Yeah. No penalty.
Okay. And then I guess you would contact the number on the tag, but like I say, sometimes it gets beat up. So for the Bering Strait region, maybe Michael Cameron and you guys know, I think Chuck Manadaluk at Coeric, he's the director of subsistence, the subsistence program. He would be he's the Ice Seal Committee regional rep.
Regional rep, yeah.
Is it just him or is there another one? I'm not up to date on I should be, but
Mike's going to know more than that, but I think,
okay.
Mike has, is in regular conversations with the Ice Seal Committee, and I think, if you were to happen to find one of our tags, a seal with one of our tags on it, between your Ice Seal Committee representative, the phone number, the information that's there, all of those are ways in which I'm sure we'll be able to get in touch and help you learn more about that seal.
All right. Well, we appreciate that. You can always bring it by in Nome. We've got lots of people who would. Chuck definitely at Coeric. He would be the proper chain of command there for the region from Ice Seal Hunters. Both myself and many other entities here often get calls for things like that. Oh, and Michael, thank you, Michael, for putting your contact in the chat. Your contact info, so we'll know. So thank you very much, because that's interesting, and we may not know what to do, but now we do. So that's very good. All right. Any questions or comments for Josh and Jessie and Michael? I got another one.
I have a
I'm
quick
sure.
one.
Oh, go ahead, Edwin. Good to see you on.
Yeah, on the layers and the emerging illustrations, um I like the idea of how that was set up because we go through the seasons and understanding the when we're out fishing, we feel some of the seals that come over and try to play with our lines, and we figure that they have a layer nearby, and then we start to see them emerge, later in the season too. And then after maybe 3 weeks, we see them um, apart from their mother, out in the field, or as the ice is receding, we see loners, calves that are emerged on their own. Then, so it's good to know that you guys are sharing. Earlier today, I just had uh, they shared information on genetics on seals, so the population seems to be stable and adapting, and so that's a good news.
Sounds
Thanks,
And
great.
but
Edwin.
with the
Yeah,
ice
that's really
conditions,
interesting.
it's gonna be a trend where we have to think about, their layers are not going to be holding up if the trends continue to warm with the ice solidation and stuff like that. And but it's good to know that we have healthy seals yet.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Edwin. In your talk with the Ice Seal Committee, as you guys were working towards this, did people have their own knowledge about, because we've got thousands of years of good observation here, about some of those environmental factors like rain or that affect haul out behavior, rain, wind, temperature. Did those match up, or was there discussion with that, or maybe not? I don't know. I was curious to see how we have a mixed, very interesting audience of both harvesters, who are also researchers, and and then looks like there's other researchers on as well. Is that something that maybe will be done or has been done, where those environmental variables, how that shook out with yours? And is that a way to maybe look at weather on a large scale from some of those satellite imagery? I don't know. I think sometimes we can get large swaths of temperature and things like that. It looks like some of these climate modelers are able to do that. Would that help with your making sure does it match up with what you found with the biologgers? Or am I asking this wrongly?
No, I think it's a good question, Gay. I was going to let Jessie start first and talk about ring seals
Okay.
and maybe what she learned from her time in the communities, and then I can share some about ribbon and spotted seals.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I guess so. For environmental variables, in the various conversations that I've had with Alaska Native community members and elders, I've heard a lot of the same variables being important, like temperature, like time of day, like cloud cover sometimes, and those are really useful for tipping us towards which variables we end up including in our analyses. So I guess it's not even just do they match up, it's that the choices that we make for how to analyze are often informed by that knowledge that is shared with us. And yeah, so I think that those do end up linking with the observations that are shared and what we end up seeing in the science. Um, and it's always nice to be able to see those produce a nice result, because I mean that information, as you said, there's a long history of those relationships being seen, and then we can also see them in our data.
Yeah, I think that would be all those environmental factors that people rely on, that knowledge here for when game is going to be up and down. I think that would be fantastic to bring that together, because you could get some of that right out of the satellites, right? Temperature,
Yeah.
precipitation, wind, that sort of thing.
One of the things I think we're noticing now is that the sophistication of the climate models and the what we're getting, like there's just an endless menu at the restaurant of climate data we could get, and weather information, and it's a little overwhelming to try to figure out which of these computer model outputs are going to be most relevant for seals. And because we can't throw the kitchen sink in there. We've got to be selective about which things we really want to focus in on, so that it can be the most informative. And so those conversations, our research cruises that our program has done on big NOAA ships out to the middle of the Bering Sea, we've had community members through the Ice Seal Committee, and so they got to come out with us and helped us catch the seals. So we're out boating with those community members in the environment, and they're sharing with us, it's today's a really sunny day, we're going to see a lot of seals today, or it's really windy and rainy, we should just stay on the ship because the seals aren't going to be out. And learning those things and those conversations definitely helps us then go to those climate models and those long lists, and we can see, oh, that's right, okay, sunny weather, clear skies versus cloudy, we can see temperature, warm versus cold, we can see those things in that long list, and then we bring that information into the models that we build. So there's that connection there that keeps us grounded.
That's great. That's great. And I would encourage more communities get to participate, because the seals are all over in the Bering Strait region. We have very different ecosystems, or very different waters, sea floors. If you're in Eastern Norton Sound, it's way different than being at Wales, or being different at Shishmaref, right? Just the conditions there. So that may be something that would be worthwhile to listen all the way up the trail if you're going from southern Bering Sea, like from northern Bering Sea, and you're looking at, I know we had, I don't know, Frank Myomick, if he's still on, he's from southern Norton Sound, he was listening. And then you've got, all the way up to Shishmaref. So very different conditions, and there might be some really nuggets of information that would help all of us make sure you're getting a very accurate estimate, because it comes back at us, right? It matters. We want you to get the best estimate possible, so we really know what's going on. So just a thought there.
Hey, Gabe.
Hi, Bivers.
Hey, yeah, my name is Bivers. Originally from Savunga, but I live here in Nome. I just want to share with you guys that the spotted seals and the common seals are pretty much year-round, even in the summer. They hang around, probably foraging where they can forage. And I had a few kids that were living in Sitka, and there was quite a few spotted seals in Sitka that I seen when we were out hunting for sea otter. But and one of the things about bearded seal we call mukluk, they usually come around late in fall. As soon as we start getting snow on the mountains, and it resembles a pack ice or ice pack, whatever you want to say. And during the spring, they're pretty much hanging around, and just floating on the ice and foraging and giving birth. And in the springtime, there is so much daylight. As subsistence hunters, there's so much daylight during the spring that we are utilize the good weather to go out and hunt the seals and bearded seals. The what were those tags called on the
We
flipper?
Yeah, we sometimes we'll use a couple of different words to describe them. We'll sometimes just call them satellite tags because they're devices that little antenna communicates with the satellite in space. So we'll sometimes call them satellite tags. We've also started calling them. Yeah, Gay's got one right there in her hands. We've also we'll sometimes call them biologgers. So that's because not only do those devices, give us information on where the seals are, and as we talked about in our talks, the percent of time that whether they're hauled out or in the water, but those tags also record depth, so we know how deep the seals are diving. The tag I think that Gay has there actually records oceanographic values, so like information on, it does ocean profiling as the seals diving, so it's really important to the oceanographers. So these devices are collecting so much information, they're logging all this biology, so we sometimes call them biologgers as another.
Okay, the biologgers are, I want to say you put them on the bearded seals, ring seals and spotted seals. And I'm assuming it shows also the migration.
Yeah, it does. And what you relayed is about that patterns of the bearded seals showing up in the spring, and then spotted seals being around year round. That is the same thing we see with those locations. So a lot of the spotted seals will go from the Alaska coast over towards the Russian coast and back, all throughout the year, kind of going back and forth, and then moving kind of north and south as the sea ice comes down and then goes back up to the north. So we're thankfully seeing some of the same patterns that you shared in those locations.
Well, this is a very good presentation you guys done, and thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you for making the time. I appreciate it.
So Bivers, there may be, from what I'm understanding, and Jessie and Josh, stop me if I'm wrong, there's this sort of thing that's glued on. This actually still has some hair on it. This was washed in at Gullivan years ago. And there's a hard plastic tag, right? A flipper tag, a hard, small little thing.
Yep.
A flipper tag that's got the contact number in
And
case
got a
everything
number on it.
falls out. Yep,
Yep.
it's gonna be on there probably for life. And then and so you can call if that's harvested, and they can find out what animal it was, because it probably has a number on it that's just for that animal. And they can tell you more about it. And then the biologger looks to be like a little canister with is it a wire, Jessie, that's pinned through the, or is it bolted into the webbing? I had kind of heard there was nuts and bolts to it, like you have to capture the seal and then bolt it
Yeah,
into
there's two screws that go through the webbing
big one.
essentially.
Maybe Josh went to go
Josh,
get one.
Josh has, yeah, he might actually be grabbing one for you. He has done a lot more of the actual capturing and attachment than I have.
Okay.
But I'd say the portion that actually attaches to the flipper, I feel like I'm gonna make a hand gesture and then he's gonna pull up a tag and I won't
So
be
you're
quite on
going
pace.
to
I
go
want
get
to
a
say it's
sandwich.
about
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah, he's going. He's going.
Yeah.
Yay.
It's
Yeah.
fuzzy. It's fuzzy.
Yeah.
Hold still.
Yeah. There we
Okay.
go, right there.
There we
So
go.
you can see basically, fits. If my hand was a flipper, it kind of fits like that. Of course, a flipper is typically a lot bigger than my hand.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but yeah, that's kind of how it fits. And if there's actually numbers right there that identify it, so it could get back to us.
So if anyone harvests one of, go ahead, Bivers.
Another thing I want to share with you guys is back when I was living out in Savunga, we go out to the hunting blinds to go hunt, and there's no seals, no bearded seals. We call them mucklucks, and some of the hunters would visualize there's killer whales, and that's what we were told, that when the killer whales are around active, or they're pretty much staying away from the killer whales. That's my understanding, and we don't see them during the whole day we're hunting out there. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple years ago, Jessie and I were on a cruise in the Bering Sea, you know, much more down the southern edge past St. Matthew, and it was a really bright, sunny, calm day, and really beautiful. And we were out in the boats, and we thought we were going to see a lot of seals that day. And we spent a lot of time, and we didn't see. I don't think we saw a single seal that day on the ice, but we did see a killer whale. So, I hear you. I think the seals know when the killer whales are around.
All right.
Yes, that's true. You know, killer whales, they when we're out hunting in the blinds, when we do spot killer whales, we do tend to, you know, all the seals tend to disappear from the area, and for several days, you know, and with the ice edge there, a lot of times, like during the fall time, in certain areas where seals starts to come to areas where on low tide, when the rocks start to show up in the coast, they like to rest on those rocks. During the fall time, like I think they're migrating too or something, but we start to see a whole bunch of seals come back up to the island, and they're resting on those rocks and stuff.
Oh, thank you, Edwin. You make me think. I should also say people are seeing injuries and that same sort of emptying out behavior. Edwin, you can confirm or deny or not speak up, but with stellar sea lions. So we're seeing more stellar sea lions in the northern Bering Sea, Bering Strait, especially around St. Lawrence Island, right on up into the strait. So Diomede, there's a new Haulout northwest of Big Diomede at Meese Peak, Cape Peak, Peek, and on the Chukotkin side. And we're seeing just much more activity late into the fall. So you'll have them hauled out in many places, but they have been doing damage. It looks like ripping apart seals and things like that. These are typically adult bulls, and people have at least said the same thing, that when those big bulls are around, hauled out in high numbers, seals will be less present. And I don't know if that matters for your purposes when we're talking about numbers and flying over, things like that. And that's something that's becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, I can speak a little. I tried to address that a little bit, and I think it's an important observation. You know, for our study and the results I presented tonight, we're kind of integrating this haul out behavior over many years, and over just a very small portion of the seal population, and using that general pattern and that mathematical model to then help us, you know, come up with a better estimate of the total population from our aerial surveys. But what we can't do with the tools and the data that we currently have is look at that fine scale stuff that you just kind of mentioned there, Gay. You know, in some world you can imagine if we had tags on and biologgers on stellar sea lions, and we had them on seals, and we had them on polar bears, then you can imagine you've got this scenario where your data might show, you know, the seals leave when, you know, the larger predator comes in or something like that. And we have colleagues in Canada who've done a few small studies with like polar bears and ring seals where they've had satellite devices, biologgers out at the same time and tried to see that interaction. But it's a really, really difficult challenge from a science perspective to really get that. But that's why it's important to always just hear those observations and those stories, because, you know, you're seeing this impact of stellar sea lions, and we may not see that in our data or hear about it, you know, from our aerial surveys, but it's important to know those things are happening and those changes are happening.
That's why we're so glad you're talking to us, so people can help you help us.
I'd like to share one more thing.
Go for it, Bivers.
You know, not all the time, but once in a while we'll run into, we call them Haulout. Those are walrus that feed on seals and birds. English, I think, rogue walrus. They become orphaned, and they have nothing else to eat, and so they got to find something else to eat, and so that's what they hunt too as well, as they become adults too as well. So that's what they eat. They also eat seals too. So,
Tough to be a seal. Everybody wants a piece of you, honestly. Thank you, Bivers. I know we're running late, but I could ask questions. I actually had and anyone else speak up or pop it in the chat too. Don't be shy. And we've got these guys in there. They haven't cried out for mercy yet. So when they do, we'll let them go. But right now they're all right. So for what you found was that and I don't know if it was just ring seals, was that the adults were real patterned in their feeding, noon and midnight or something like that, and that the young seals are like feeding all the time. Could that be based on prey type that is just different in those different age class and sizes of seals and experience? Is that something that you look for or calculate out? I don't know if you do that, but it just seemed to me like that would be something you know, some fish go down when it gets too bright, and some things come up when it gets bright, and you have experienced adult seals who are like, I'm not going to bother until the right time, till I get what I want, where I want it, as opposed to a young seal that's like, I'm hungry, I'm just going in. Is that something like that could be at work?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. We weren't able to, I guess, figure out with this particular data set if that was at play, because we weren't looking at dive depth or at like we didn't have stomach contents for these seals or that kind of information to match up with. But
I'm thinking depth from like
yeah, but it is absolutely possible. Yeah, we didn't look at dive depth for this study. We were just trying to focus in on the emergence timing. But I know Justin Crawford and some of the folks at ADF&G have done some comparison of diving behavior for adult and subadult ring seals. And if I remember some of the results from Justin's work on that, I think if I remember right, I think one of the hypotheses that he shared was that it could be that also these subadults might be less efficient at foraging compared to adult seals. Like they're not as skilled of hunters yet. Maybe it takes more work for a subadult seal if they're not as successful getting getting prey every time that they try. So I think that diet is a possibility. Sort of related to diet, we wonder whether habitat plays a role. Most of the subadults in our data set were farther south and in more of like a broken pack ice type environment than a lot of the adult seals in our data set that were farther north and in more stable landfast ice. And so that probably does come with very different access to prey. And so, yeah, prey could be a big part of that difference in behavior that we saw for adults and subadults. It could be related to potentially different levels of reliance on layers. We did also have a much smaller sample size though for subadults. We only had 16 subadults and 48 adult seals. So I can't rule out that some of that is just an artifact of our sample, but it's something that would be really interesting to dig into further. And yeah, to incorporate the information on dive depth. That would be interesting as well.
All right. Any other questions? Last one, because this mattered to us during the 2010, 2011, or 2011, it was 2011 event, the ice seal unusual mortality event, where the seals were losing their hair. See you, Edwin? Where the seals were losing their hair and had these sores, all 4 species. And one of the things I don't know, and your study's done a great job, is there a difference either in the timing or the length per species? Is there a difference in the length of time for the molt? Because you have the mukluk, the ugruk or bearded seal, with very thick skin. Does he, or is it just because it's on the surface where they're getting the blood going with the heat of the sun and they got to grow that new coat and it'll start pushing all those old hairs out? You should never see a bald seal, but that process, is it, when you looked at all your ribbon, ringed, spotted, bearded, are those, because a ring seal's got a lot thinner skin, is that length of the molts, time it takes that animal to grow his hair, is that, and maybe you can't get at that with the, because you're not looking at hair growth, but that in that haul out time, is it pretty solid, whether you start early or finish late? Are you still at that 4 weeks or 3, whatever it takes? Is that something you were able to pick up on at all? I'm very curious on that length of molt for the different types of skin
Yeah.
that comes with this.
I think so Colleen Reichmuth and Nicole Tomitz down in California and the UC Santa Cruz lab and the Alaska Sea Life Center, they've got a lot of captive work they've done with captive seals, looking at the molt and physiology of seals, and they have started to study some of those differences between bearded seals and spotted seals and ring seals. So they've got more information than we do on that, because they can observe the seals every day and see how that molt progresses. They also understand kind of physiological changes that might be happening. I think for the ribbon, spotted, and bearded seals, I think it's safe to say from our data we see ribbon and spotted seals are fairly similar, and that makes sense. They overlap in space. They're on the ice edge. They're similar size, similar prey, and so their at least molt behavior that we see in the haul out seems to be similar duration. But bearded seals seem to have a slightly different thing going on, and it may be that because they're so much bigger, their skin is different. It may be where they are, things like that. And I think some of Colleen and Nicole's work is starting to get at that.
All right, we'll give them a call and we'll see what they can do.
I don't know, Jessie,
We have a
what
Frank
do we know from ring seals?
Frank Myomic, you had your hand raised. Is there something? Come on
Yes,
back. If you have the question.
God forbid we had an oil spill. I heard there's one in St. George Island. Do you have real-time data from seals monitoring in such cases of oil spill area?
Like if we had one here in the Bering Strait region?
Yeah,
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't. We're not putting biologgers tags out on an annual basis, so that we're able to do that. But there are models from other parts of the country, in the Northeast and along California, where there are more regular tags out on marine mammals or other species, and they're able to see real time maps of this is where the seals are, and maybe there's an oil spill here, or maybe there's a storm that comes through, and they're able to kind of monitor them real time. We unfortunately just don't have a lot of tags out at any one time where we can do that. But it would be nice if we did. There's some, I can imagine there'd be some really interesting insights to get from having a web page that you could go to in your community and see what the seals are doing based on the weather and information that you're seeing outside your window, or when there's an oil spill or something like that. But we don't have the ability to put that many tags out right now.
So Frank brings up Frank, that's an awesome thought. And you made my little gears, which are pretty rusted, start to spin. Is that something that when, I don't know if and this would be a question for everybody, I guess, is if, Frank, you bring up the big bad elephant in the room or whatever, what do we do if that's going to happen? Because it's a big concern, Jessie and Josh, for the Bering Strait region. We're seeing 900-foot tankers going right past Diomede, full of crude oil now in the fall, and God only knows into the winter. So is that in an emergency plan, Frank, that we could maybe through tribes, or Austin, if you're still on, is that something we could ask for when we're like all of us, if we have a spill, we should get these guys or whoever's tagged ready, and maybe they can have emergency funds at their end or something to do that sort of thing. Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much for that thought. Austin, go ahead to answer.
Yeah, I wonder, I guess I would reframe the question. This data that we're presented with, my question usually is, how does it help regions of Alaska that hunt these animals? And, here in Bering Strait region, we lack, local management authority to address a spill or address shipping or address mining or address bottom trawling. This data is great for the science aspect, but where it really matters is when questions like Frank have, how does that make a positive impact for us? For instance, the North Pacific Fishery Management Council is presently, considering management plans for the Northern Bering Sea. Yet I don't see how the connection between ice seal behavior, ice seal science, and other science areas, or how it might benefit local users. Here in the Bering Strait region, we make tremendous use of marine mammals, and yet there usually, I should say, usually isn't fair to say, usually isn't much ability to use this kind of science to advocate for subsistence users.
Good point, Austin. You make me think there on what is the discussion for something like emerging fisheries, and maybe because NOAA and NOAA, maybe are you guys, how does that work? What Austin's saying, are you guys called upon by fisheries to provide this information and they use it as well?
I think
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The short answer to your question is the interactions between the fisheries side of NOAA Fisheries and the marine mammal side of NOAA Fisheries is definitely increasing in intensity, and there's a lot more interest in creating ecosystem, understanding it as a full ecosystem sort of a process. And so the research that we're doing does not exist just in a silo. It's definitely related to changes in fisheries as well. And ultimately, we think we'll be able to use it to help make better predictions and better understand the ecosystem. I think that the value of the research that we've been discussing today, obviously, there's information about changes in behavior. If the ecosystem's changing, we want to be able to know if we need to have predictions on how changes in behavior can happen. But also, as we've shown, those changes in behavior seasonally or throughout the day are useful for estimating abundance. And you can imagine that just knowing the abundance is a useful metric for being able to understand ecosystem and the areas around it.
All right. Any thoughts, anyone? Thank you very much, Mike. I know, I see where you're going. You need to have that abundance estimate. That is by law, but it's also good common sense to know how many seals and importantly, more importantly, in my mind, how many are they reproducing at the right rate? Are they eating the right foods? That kind of thing. If you have 1 million that are starving versus 500,000 that are pumping out babies every year that are fat, you know, that's but you do need those numbers. So I appreciate that.
And the tags that Josh and Jessie were talking about has already been discussed. The same data from the tags can be used to understand movements. Those movements can be correlated with different ecosystem variables like where the fish are, where the sea ice is, relationships to storms, and various things. As we collect larger and larger data sets, we can better understand those relationships and connections. The dive data can help us to better understand where the animals are feeding, which can be related to the species, the fish species that they themselves are feeding on. And so, you know, the ecosystem is connected, and the research that we're doing is connected.
All right. I know we've gone long. We better, I suppose, let these people go. But Frank, thank you so much. You brought up and Austin and Bivers and everybody who spoke up. Any other thoughts or questions, things like that? All right, you're getting the thumbs up all around. Go ahead, Bivers.
Yeah, we have, is it alga bloom around here? And I
Harmful
noticed,
algae. Mm-hmm.
and I noticed a couple of years ago when we were up Point Lay, Wainwright, there was some up there. Should you guys or us be concerned about it as well? It's already around here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. You were talking about these harmful algal blooms, and you know, there's been a lot of concern about those and a lot of tracking of when those occur, and relying on local communities to inform monitoring of when they occur. There certainly is a history of harmful algal blooms, you know, impacting marine mammals, but we're just don't know a lot right now about those impacts on Arctic seals, and it's certainly something that I think a lot of people have their eyes on as something we want to learn more about. Our program doesn't have much experience with them really kind of understanding the mechanisms of kind of how algal blooms might impact seals, but you know, that is something to think about in the future. If we had opportunities to deploy biologgers, you know, as Mike was saying, we learn, you know, where they go, how deep they dive, and the ability to kind of link that in real time to when these harmful algal blooms are witnessed by local observers, that would give us some interesting information to address some of those questions. But you know, it's a relatively new thing in Alaska and in the Arctic, and so we're just now starting to think about what the impacts might be. And I know that, I don't know, Gay, you were at AMSS last week. There's often the Marine Science Symposium Anchorage. There's often talks about harmful algal blooms there, kind of updates on how frequently we're seeing them. So maybe there was some discussion.
There was a section, harmful algal blooms are found now throughout the state of Alaska for a long time in the Gulf of Alaska. The biggest concern, Bivers, thank you for bringing that up. The concern it would be naturally everyone's worried about walrus. They're a feeder of things on the bottom that filter out algae. And then they store it, and then the walrus comes and he eats, or us come and eat a bunch of clams or all of the crab, and we might get sick. So I would think the bearded seal would be
Bearded seals too,
the
yeah.
one that would be most like a walrus in his diet, in his normal diet. And so crab and clam and tuna, whatever. And so, yes, it is a concern. And I think, thank you, Austin, for bringing it up. No bad on you guys, but it's going to be another case of self-rescue kind of world. We will probably see, and if we see animals in distress, it's going to be the people of the region that will be responding to that. And what we can do is what we're trying to prepare for, and that is getting monitoring more in place, getting something local here in Nome where we can get stuff tested. There'll be another talk later in April, I think, on harmful algal bloom and as we go into the summer. But I think we will definitely, both Nome Eskimo, Norton Sound Health Corporation's Office of Environmental Health, my office, Alaska Sea Grant, COERIC for sure, Subsistence, we're all going to be looking or letting people know to be aware and also to collect samples. We have a project that not only right now, Norton Sound Health Corporation, Office of Environmental Health, we all work together as entities, and they've got a way to test some seafoods. And then we will also have this summer as a research project, a 5-year research project kicks in with NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and a whole bunch of other Nome Eskimo and so forth. That'll be, I think the acronym is EcoHab 2. And we will be able and requesting samples so that we can at least try to get some monitoring on just what you're worried about, because everyone's worried about that. And I don't think bearded seals are the only ones that could be affected. You know, if you're eating something else that collects algae, you know, like a herring or something, you know, that may be spotted seals. If we see odd behavior, don't forget, we also have disease issues that haven't been addressed well. Something like avian influenza and other diseases that animals normally get, but that avian influenza is still a tricky one in my book. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you for bringing that up, and we will hear more about it this spring as we go into the harvest, I hope. Where to send samples, but it's again a case of self-rescue. We're going to have to do it ourselves, kind of a thing. With that, thank you, Jessie. I don't know if Mike's still on. He's probably, I hope he gives you
Mike had to leave. He had to sign off, so.
Okay, well, I hope you get tomorrow off because you've done a great job. So Jessie and Josh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Next
Thank
week.
you for having us.
Oh, you bet. We're going to have you back again, I think, because we want to hear more. But next week, for those who are still on the 12th, which I think is a Thursday, we heard recently about the bottom trawl survey results for the Northern Bering Sea by NOAA. We're going to hear the surface trawl results from the surface trawl survey of the Northern Bering Sea next week on Thursday. So that one will get more at things like young salmon, the smaller fish that are in the water column, not the crabs so much and the cod that are on the bottom, but we're going to be getting the results from what they got from their surface trawl survey. So tune in again on the 12th at 6:30 p.m. That's going to be a very interesting one, and it'll give us the rest of the water column from what we heard recently. So with that, actually, Jessie and Josh, if you guys could stay on for just 1 second longer, and we'll let all these nice people who've stayed on go to bed. So thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you hopefully Thursday. That's going to be a good one.